have Professor Bouter speak to you today. And without further ado, I'll let him take away on the talk in terms of generative AI use in research and publication ethics.
Well, thank you. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here. And after this introduction, I can only disappoint you. So I apologize for that in advance. That's not an issue. I'd like to do my lecture, and you can interrupt me if you want, but I will make sure that we have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So you can also pile your questions up for later. Good start. I use the arrows, no problem. Oh, the arrows don't work either. That's good. That's good. Still remember the times of the overhead projector. I'm not sure whether any of you know that. The overhead projector was foolproof. The only thing that could break down was the bulb. And then you had a button, and when you switch it, another bulb would materialize, and it worked again. And when the PowerPoint came, I was still carrying my transparency, my story on transparency for many years, until I discovered that in no room they had an overhead projector anymore as a backup. So then I stopped, and here I am. The arrows, yeah, seem to work more or less. Okay. I won't touch anything anymore. Thank you. What I wanted to say is that the bottom line of my story is as follows. I will argue that generative AI is not inherently good or bad. It doesn't change, it doesn't really change the principles and the standards of research and of research integrity, but generative AI just increases the possibility of doing research and also, sadly, the possibilities of committing research misconduct, but also increasing the possibilities of detecting research misconduct. So that is basically what is the short bottom line of my story. The parts are, I will start off with explaining a little bit my views on the opportunities and the threats that the new tool, the new kid on the block, the generative AI brings. Then look at the state of the scholarly literature in general and zoom in on retractions and the need to do more retractions in more specific, and also the contribution of generative AI in that field. And then take a few minutes to digest what the most important stakeholders can do. And in my view, the most important stakeholders are the research institutions, the publishers, and the funding agencies. And we need each other collectively to make the scholarly world a bit better, I believe. And there is also a need for that. Now, talking about generative AI, and on the right side, you see a few of these tools. It is a subset of what we call artificial intelligence. By the way, you can get the slides I'm using today, and below the slides in the PDF, there are all my references. I don't like to have references in the slides, but they're below it. Many additional remarks and an explanation of all these things, artificial intelligence, neural networks, and deep learning is there. The essence of generative AI to me is that you can interact in a human mimicking way with the software by typing to it and getting words back, and by talking to it and getting text back, spoken text back. That is the thing, and it's exciting. It's exciting. It won't go away. Let's not dream about that. Even if we want it to go away, it won't go away. That happens with all new technology which is being introduced. Sometimes people are trying to push it back, never successful. It will not be successful here either. And that's okay, because there are many good usages. Personally, I use it mainly so far as a source of inspiration and a more clever search engine. It's amazingly clever as a search engine. I discovered increasingly, I use it on a daily basis now. My PhD students and postdocs are using it in research as well. You can use it in research for data collection, code generation, that goes wonderfully well, code generation in R, for instance. You can use it for data analysis and also for reporting, which is especially friendly for people from countries where English is not a native language. It helps them a lot and brings them to a level playing field with the countries where English is one of the most important languages, like this country. And that is, to me and to many scholars, okay, as long as you report it transparently. And I later have slides on what and how and when you need to report that. But let's keep it this way. You need to be open. You need to be transparent. As a mentor of a supervisor, the hour before we went here, we had an interesting discussion about AI being a co-supervisor or maybe the main supervisor of PhD students. As a helper, it is a good idea, I believe. It's a fastly moving target, it's developing, but we need to put restrictions on that because there are some very scary elements in that, and a good group of people on this campus is thinking very carefully about what and how, and that PhD thesis will be important for the field, I believe. And then I interact a lot with publishers the last few years as well, and they are considering and already doing that and using AI in their editorial offices. Well, we know the text similarity screening for plagiarism, of course. You have that for images as well as now. But you can also check for data integrity, for reporting quality, sometimes of fraud you can detect. There's a whole suite of software available nowadays, and publishers increasingly use that. The only restriction there is it should be announced clearly, and the restrictions are that you have to be careful for intellectual property and the privacy of the elements, the data protection elements, because these AI tools are greedy. They take all your data and they use it for training purposes and for answers they give to other prompts. That is not the idea, of course, but that can be done where you pay a bit more. You can get a closed environment without leakage of the stuff that is being fed to the AI tool. So this is all, it's not without problems, but it's the good side of generative AI, I believe. But there is also a bad side, and that's a rather black side, I believe. People can use it to fabricate and falsify data rapidly. When AI, ChatGPT was around for 3 months, I was in a meeting like this, and a guy who really knew the field, he wrote with the audience in 50 minutes a complete paper. We selected the research question, the hypothesis, we made up the data, or we gave the prompts to make up the data, we analyzed the data, we wrote the paper, and we put it in New England Journal of Medicine format, and it looked convincingly. And then one person raised his arms and said, well, listen, I see there a reference that cannot be true, that is not right. It's referring to a year in the future, for instance. And then, oh, that's what I forgot. Please don't use references that don't exist, point. And then it happens. So it's wonderful for frauds, really wonderful. That's not okay, of course, but it's not easy to detect. In fact, there is a kind of arms race going on now. And they're very clever whiz kids making the software to detect it, and the enemy is not sleeping either. So there is a really arms race going on, and I have no clue who will win. Some people are optimistic, some people are pessimistic. Also, a few months after ChatGPT was introduced, I was at the Frankfurter Buchmesse. That is the event for the publishers annually in Frankfurt. And there the chair of ALEA, the big league of academies of arts and sciences in Europe, he said, maybe we should forget about plagiarism and intellectual property. We've lost that game. And I'm not sure he's right, But what the JTPT and similar programs are doing is at least micro plagiarism. They rob bits and pieces and put it together in a different way. I'm not worrying personally that much myself, but it can easily be labeled as plagiarism and copyright infringement. So that's not okay, and again, difficult to detect. And then it became clear that the AI tools, the generative AI tools, they sometimes hallucinate. They have embarrassing biases sometimes. They make stupid errors, and we need to check it for them. So the bottom line is, I'm not sure that everyone agree, but generative AI can never be held accountable. They cannot take responsibility. Always a human has to take responsibility. It cannot be an author. Within a few months after its introduction, Nature said, well, under some conditions, AI can be an author. No way. Within 2 weeks, that was withdrawn again. It's not a good idea. It cannot take the responsibility. It's not accountable. The human is responsible, even when he or she does not understand what's happening. It's a bit, I used the example 1 hour before as well. It's a bit like having kids. They do things you sometimes don't know and often don't understand, but you, as a parent, you're still responsible. So that is the relation you have with your tools, the relation you have with all your tools. I'm still from the time that statistical analysis was so easy with a program called SPSS. And there was a button you can push on, and then you got a statistic. No one understood anymore what was happening, but it was still your p-value, and you were responsible for that. This is not essentially different. It's more complex, and it's more sophisticated, I know, but it's not essentially different. Now, there is emerging the feeling that we need codes for AI, and I agree. It should not be integrated in the codes for research integrity. We already have, I believe, because AI doesn't change essentially anything to the standards and the principles of research integrity. Be transparent, be honest, be accountable. That is all the same, whether you use AI or not. Now we need separate codes for AI, and they are there. There's a whole family of codes already. The code I currently like most is the European one. It's a bit high over, but it's well written. It's a generic code catering for all disciplinary fields and quite abstract. So in that sense, it's not good enough. And I like it. That's a code for researchers, their institutes, for the funders and the publishers as well, which is good because we're all in the same game. We need, of course, also more granulated codes for specific disciplinary fields, concrete do's and don'ts, concrete recipes for specific corners of academical research, and they are there, but it's so difficult. Codifying a moving target is usually not a good idea because it's moving so fast. When the code is ready, it's out of date by definition. And this target is moving so incredibly fast. So we need to figure out a way how to be dynamic in our coding and flexible enough to keep up with what's happening in practice. That is a challenge. Many people are working on that challenge, but that is a real challenge. And this is not, I call it here a tsunami of generative AI codes. I spent one afternoon looking for them, and I stopped when I had found 80 of them. And there must be many more by now because that was half a year ago or something like it. They're global, they're regional, they're national, they're local. The perspective difference, sometimes it's only legal, then it's ethical, a publisher, it's only from the funder or combinations of the whole thing. We have the whole range from high over abstract, beautiful words saying not much for people who wants to know on the ground what is forbidden and what is allowed. And also codes that are trying to describe the do's and the don'ts of the field. as I said already, alignment with the levels of high over and down and international and national and local, that is important. And what I learned from a colleague retired a long time ago, he was in the integrity of public governance. And he always said, codes are nothing. Coding is everything. Meaning that the process of the making of a code, talking about the code, deliberating the pros and cons, that is the intervention. That is where it happens. And he did it every 2 years in his own department. He was a dean. He did it every 2 years in his own faculty. Just reinvent the wheel again and again. First and foremost, because there are many new people entered the shop. And secondly, because talking about it, that is the intervention. A code is lying somewhere in a cupboard and no one reads it. I was one of the authors of the Dutch Code of Conduct on Research Integrity. I believe it's a wonderful code, but it's a complete failure because no one is reading it. So this is not enough, having a code. It is enough, you need the people to understand the code, to try to adopt the code, and you also need to check whether they are compliant with the recommendations and the obligations of the code. And in this field, that's not easy, but it needs to be attempted at least. This is a promise I made already. This is a recent paper a few weeks ago by a guy called David Resnick and another one called Mohammed Hosseini, who was a PhD student here in Dublin of VET. And they wrote a very clever proposal on how to act with this, because AI, it's by now it's not recognizable anymore. When you use Google, you are using AI already. When you use Word, you are using AI already. So this is maybe quite trivial to most of us, but you cannot say to authors, when you submit a manuscript, you should declare all your AI use. That doesn't make any sense. And it's not important to declare many elements of the AI use. It is important to report what is intentional and substantial. And intentional, they defined quite loosely as you use it with a specific goal of purpose in mind. And substantial, they say this is important to make decisions that directly affect your research results or generate content, data, or images, or analyze content, data, or images. Again, this needs to be operationalized further, but it gives some guidance. And some publishers are already picking this up and trying to operationalize these criteria. Because it's not that easy to be clear about on what is expected and what is mandatory and what is wanted, optional. It's also becoming clearer and clearer that when you report AI use, you should also do that on a level that others can more or less reproduce what you did. I know that these programs change all the time and it will never be completely successful, the reproduction attempt, but you should be clear what has been done in terms of which programs, which version, and what were the prompts you have. And you can bury that in a digital supplement or in a repository or whatever. I'm not saying that everyone should be reproducing your work, but it should be, the potential should be there. It should be possible to go back there and to see what happens when you use these prompts in that program. And where it should be done, there's a whole discussion in publishing world, academic publishing. Some people say this is in the acknowledgement. Other people say no, this is a new category. It's like the ethics section of a paper. And now there seems to be some convergence that it needs to be in the methods part, because it's just another tool you use. And that is where you report how you did your research. And it should never look like an author, because in the acknowledgement sections, you usually thank people who were almost an author or contributed substantially, but not enough to be an author. You cannot say that for generative AI programs. So it should not be in the acknowledgement section and never in the author lines, of course. That is the idea. But this is all moving targets. When I give this talk in a year from now, I may say slightly different things. I don't guarantee this content long. I'm sorry. And I skip to the second part, and that is that our research record is increasingly getting polluted by fake, fraudulent, factually flawed, and ethically unacceptable papers. Of course, these manuscripts should never been submitted, and if submitted, never been published, but it happens. It happens. And when it happens, the thing is surgery, retraction of the material from the published track record, not by removing it completely, but by indicating, don't use this at home, don't trust this material. And that is a retraction. The point is that not all articles that should be retracted actually are retracted. And even when retracted, papers are quite often still cited. Some without knowing that the paper was retracted, and sometimes on purpose, of course. But unknowingly citing a retracted paper is quite familiar. And one of the reasons is it's not so easy to detect that the paper is retracted. That's quite difficult. And that should be repaired. One of my PhD students, she will defend her PhD thesis in 1 month. She discovered, she checked for 12 methods to identify retractions, bibliometrical databases, things like Zotero and EndNote and what have you, how easy it was to identify retracted papers. Only 1% of the papers was identified by all 12 methods. So it sounds obvious, but it's not that easy. And there are reasons for that. I won't dwell into that. And why is this awful? This is awful because you let your colleagues astray. People might follow the strong lead, and even worse, doctor might treat their patients with a fake paper results. It may end up in a systematic review, which it actually does, and may influence the clinical treatment guidelines that is for patients, but the same is in social phenomena, and the same is in environmental research and veterinary research. There are many parts of research where research can matter for real people, for real environments, for real animals. So this is really awful. And in a more abstract way, it undermines trust. And without trust, it doesn't work in academia. Scholars need to be able to trust each other. Well, it's trust and verify, of course, but you need to be able to trust each other. And society needs to be able to trust us. Otherwise, nothing will be implemented anymore, even the solid knowledge we produce. I hope you ever seen this thing. It's a web called Retraction Watch. It's not a fancy web, but it's a weblog. It's beautiful. Ivan Oransky started it close to 20 years ago. And one of the things he said is a leaderboard of retractions. Now, some of you may not even have 58 papers, but my fellow Dutch scholar, Diederik Stapel, he had 58 retractions. And he is number 8 on the list. So there are even more possibilities there. And Ivan, and he's the guy who knows it best, I think, worldwide currently, his guesstimate, it's not easy to investigate it, and it's not investigated properly, but his guesstimate is that while about 1% on average over the last decade, 0.1% has been retracted, it should actually be more than 2%. So we're missing a factor at least 10 and maybe 20. And when you look at what's happening, it's rising. The SAD record in 2023 was 10,000 retractions, more than that. And even December was not yet ended. It was 8 December. And it's currently higher again. And when you say that it should be 10 times as more, we need to retract 100,000 papers. that's not doable, I think. So we need to work more on prevention of papers that later should be rejected. Don't publish them. That is the important message here. And here comes generative AI again, and I alluded to this already. Usually the paper mills, the criminal companies where you can buy a paper, an authorship on a paper, they were using very clever boys and girls in underprivileged countries, and they wrote the papers like they do for the thesis of students. And this is a whole industry. You cannot imagine how large that industry is. But now with generative AI, with a push of the button, you can write a fake paper, which is quite credible as well. So they love these new AI tools, really. And you see it going stronger. I'll give you some graphs later on. You can fabricate papers from scratch or put pieces of other papers together, a bit of paraphrasing, plagiarism. You can sell authorship it's usually on a no cure, no pay basis. First authorship is a bit more expensive. Top journal is a bit more expensive. But still, it's nothing compared to a salary. And you can buy citations. When you need for your next promotion, you need 500 or 1,000 additional citations. No problem. They can make it happen. And I believe that 500 citations, the current rate is $250 or something like it. So it's quite easy. It's quite easy. It's not allowed, and it's morally completely wrong, of course, but it happens. And you see fake reviewers as well, and fake reviews, and AI helps a lot there. You see bribed editors, sometimes guest editors of supplements, sometimes of real journals. It all happens. And we have then the category of predatory and hijacked journals. Predatory journals are who are not delivering value for money in terms of quality, maintenance, and good peer review. Well, some people argue that no scholarly journal delivers value for money because they still have profit margins of 40%, which is a bit over the top, but still. And you also have high-tech journals. These are predatory journals that mimic a website of a regular prestigious journal with a few subtle differences no one notices. And when you submit your paper there on accident, they have it. And when you then discover that a few days later that you submitted it to not to the real thing, you can get it back for a price. They just hijack your manuscript and only give it back. You can only withdraw it when you pay for it. So these things are happening on a quite alarming scale. Here you see such a paper mill, garbage in and toxic publications go out. And here are the buyers waiting. There are the buyers waiting. And this is what two pieces of clever software show. These are the articles that show clear signs of paper mill activity. It's too complicated to explain it, and I don't understand it fully myself, but no one knows how good these programs really are, but let's assume that they are good enough. You see that fake papers are on the rise quite steeply. It's now already close to 2% of the published papers are made by AI. Generative AI later, more old-fashioned AI earlier. Fake papers in essence, and it's a bit more in medicine and biology and a bit less in economics. I'm not sure I believe that, but still. And also there is another piece of software, so it's a bit difficult to compare this, that says that 10 to 30% already of this submitted manuscripts already show signs of not allowed generative AI and are suspicious of paper mill activity. This is awful, isn't this? This is awful. This is really, and when you go to conferences now of publishers, of academic publishers, and to research integrity, this is the topic, paper mills. There was about a month ago, there was in Oxford, a meeting only on this topic. And people are worried, and rightly so. You could say it's 2% of the publications and 10% of the submissions. So the reviewers do their work quite well, but I'm not sure that is true because manuscripts are more recent than the publications. And the two software tools are different, of course. This is for retractions, two pieces of software functioning quite decent. And we know that it's quite decent because we have gold standard there, showing that it is rising. It's now not at the level of 1/10%, which I alluded to earlier, and that is the average of the last 10 years. But now it's on the level of 0.2%, and it's still rising. It's still a factor of 5 or 10 too low, most likely, but this is what's happening. So a substantial part of the literature is polluted. Here you see countries, the 0.1%, that's the left line, and some countries are lower. They're all countries. Ireland is not part of it. US is not part of it. The Netherlands is not part of it. But they have a substantial volume. It's happening worldwide, the fact paper problem, but it's a bit more in these countries, up to a factor of 3 or 4. You see here, that's a bit complex graph, and maybe I have a thing. Yeah, this shows worldwide. This is the average again, for the last 10 years, the 0.1%, and this is what the institutions do. 100 institutions have a rate which is 10 times as more as retractions. So these are the suspicious institutions. This is an interesting one that concerns China. And in China, when you want to become a medical doctor, you need a few international peer-reviewed publications. These poor people have no skills to do that. Often they have no time to do it. They have no resources to do that. But the paper mills will sell you these papers. And then sometimes they're retracted later. So, and especially in hospital, with this line, it's 3 times as high. And the universities in China are on the world's average, more or less. So these are the statistics. I'm not saying that you should believe them because there might be bias all over the place here. When only 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 papers that should be retracted is retracted, it might be easily being a bias, leading to a bias in disadvantage or a specific region in the world or a specific country. So we have to be careful there. These are the institutions. I won't dwell long on that, but the last one is interesting. The Shanghai Jiao Tong University, that is the university producing the Shanghai Index. It's also a leader in retractions. And these are my heroes in the field. These are the sleuths, the research integrity detectives. You may know a few of them. Quite famous is Elizabeth Dick. She has eagle eyes. She can recognize whether a picture of a Western blot, for instance, is fabricated. This is the clever chap, Guillaume Cabernac. He is making all the clever detection software. So he's a hacker on the right side of the line, so to say. He's really wonderful. Jennifer, she just shifted her career. She was a biomedical investigator and in genetics, and she discovered that in her specific field, more than half of the papers were fake papers because they're so difficult to fake. And now she is become a professor in research integrity, and she's fighting the enemy from that angle. And Nick is interesting as well. He was also one of the sleuths and detectives. He recently joined the Wiley company to help the publishers to do the right thing, and that might be a good idea. Like big companies hiring former hackers as well. He might be useful. And this lady, I'm really a fan of her. She is the person that single-handed amassed, I believe now, up to 80 paper mills already. She's from Russia, but she's worldwide active, and she's unmasking a paper mill almost on a daily basis now. It's really great. What is awful is that these people sometimes end up in lawsuits, and they're not paid for their work. No one is really enthusiastic, and publishers are not always responding to that. And that is one of the difficult issues with retractions. Publishers and journals are slow. And also research institutes are sometimes reluctant to investigate. And sometimes the retraction notice, the notice explaining what happens when there is a retraction, are vague and incomplete. And that probably means that they're written by lawyers with the idea to prevent lawsuits. That is how it goes in big companies. And that's not informative. It's awful for researchers. And then it's still cited and included in systematic review and clinical guidelines, as I alluded to. And now the progressive insight is that a retraction should not be a sanction for misbehavior. No, it should just be an act of cleaning of what you know to be wrong from the literature without any assumption about intentionality or misbehavior or whatsoever. Then it can be done quicker, and it should be done quicker, because it takes years sometimes until all the appeal in cases has ended and the journal has pondered all the evidence and decide, well, maybe a rejection. Let's ask all the authors of the paper. Bullshit. You should not ask the authors whether their paper should be rejected. You should make a decision. So there is so much room for improvement there. And the journals are now understanding that more or less. Now, these are few of the companies and organizations taking care of it, united to act. What I like in that organization is that all stakeholders work together against paper mills. This is about removing perverse incentive in the way we assess researchers, which is probably what drives the business model of paper mills. We have our conferences. I will announce it on my last slide. And then maybe just a practical thing I want you to. Did you ever notice this sign on a PDF of a paper? Do you know what it is? When you click on it, try it, click on it. You see whether the paper, whether you look at the most recent version. And when it is rejected, you see that. I didn't know that either until a few years ago. It's such a clever trick. It's just a clickable button in a PDF. And then you don't need to consult the website of the publisher to know whether a paper is rejected. You can see it immediately. It's great. And the retraction word database is in their engine room. So the gold standard is in their engine room. It's really wonderful. Now, what can institutes do? I'll do this a bit quickly because I want to have time for discussion as well. What is important is transparency. Without transparency, accountability is not easy. So we need open methods, open codes, and open data. I know there are exceptions, but there are not that many exceptions. Usually this can be done possibly with a short embargo. We need to train people in how we suppose them to behave in methodology and integrity. We need good quality and also checks and balances in that, and supervision and quality control. I've said a lot of awful things about pharmaceutical companies in my career, but they do one thing right, and that is quality assurance. We can learn a lot from them in academia. We don't care. We don't check what the quality of our work is, hardly ever. We should do that much better. Researcher assessment, I mentioned that already. Investigate quickly when a paper might not be valid, withdraw it then quickly, and we need to have the guidelines on AI use. For publishers, it's roughly the same. They should also look at the identity of reviewers and the quality of review reports, and do the quality checks in the editorial office. Peer reviewers are volunteers. You cannot expect that they spend days on a paper, pulling it apart and reanalyzing the data. That's not realistic. That should happen in the editorial office. There they should do the analysis, and AI is great for it. There are tools already when you have the data available, they can mimic the analysis and redo it in a quite convincing way. The STM Integrity Hub, that's a software suite the big publishers are sharing with all the detecting tools. They keep it secret a little bit because the enemy is watching as well, of course. But it's great stuff what is in that engine room. And it is improving, but the enemy is improving as well, of course. And then quick retraction, and again, be clear on AI use. And maybe the most important player in the field, at least in my view, are the funding agencies. They don't need to be popular. We all want their money. So they can take measures. They don't need to negotiate with everyone. They can just say, these are the rules. When you don't want to comply, it's okay. We don't give you our grants. They can make it happen. Open data, which is now more or less the norm in some fields, happens because the funder said, open data from tomorrow. No discussion, end of discussion. They should do that in this domain as well, I believe. They should demand good training, good supervision, be fair and open in their procedures themselves, which is a difficult issue currently. Take the quality assurance serious. I was always so surprised, and I'm still surprised, that funders hardly ever care what really happens with their money. It's so weird. They give you a lot of money, and then they wait for your next grant application. They never evaluate how good you did. Maybe, and that's more reactionary, they should give you money and only do the evaluation afterwards, because then you can see how good the research was. You cannot see that in advance that well. So there's room for improvement there. And they should also fund the research underlying the stuff we've been discussing today, because evidence-based policy is important and we need more research on research. And luckily it's happening currently, but that is what we need. That is important. Conclusions. We should use it responsibly. We should be transparent about generative AI use and report it when it's intentional and substantial, like Resnick and Hosseini proposed. And it doesn't change any of the principles of doing research and the integrity of research. If you're still not bored by the topic, we'll have a nice symposium, the runner-up of the next World Conference on Research Integrity on the 28th of May. It will be taped and put on the Vimeo channel of the foundation quickly when it's not convenient. It should be doable from this time zone, but from some parts of the world it will become difficult, of course. And the conference itself will be early May next year. You get the PDF, I believe, and all the QR codes bring you to the respective websites. And on the foundation, you see all the statements we've made on research integrity over the years, starting with the Singapore Declaration. And that leads you all to the Vimeo channel, where there are many interesting talks by people who give lectures on research integrity. And with that, I thank you for your attention.